there are other guests. We don't have space for everybody to be on screen, but I will say hi to a good friend also coming from the US, Fernando Jaramillo. I will say hi, and then we will start. Hola, Fernando. Hi, Fernando. How are you doing? From Texas, I believe.
Hola, Sergio. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. There's also Urbi Garay from the Executive Committee, Christian Yepes from co-chair. I see them here. Several track-chairs are here. Thank you so much for coming. Well, we will start because we have only 1 hour or so, and we want to get all the information, all the insights from these two important guests. As you said, as you probably know, normally in BALAS, the Business Association for Latin American Studies, we have this mediator session, and we normally try to have different perspectives on the publishing process, on how to get published in good journals. We have had some associations with several journals, Journal of Business Research probably being the most important academia in Latin America, but we want to try and to get more information from different scholars in the business research area, and so we are very glad and happy and honored that we have Professor Martina Musten here, and also Professor Daniel Roddick here. As I said earlier, this session was planned by Ricardo Buitrago. Thanks to him for bringing both of you to the conference. And as I said also before, you are more than welcome to join us next year in the mediators or in the conference in Lisbon by June. Well, I will go first with Martina Musten. She's the Charles Hostel Professor of Global Business at the San Diego State University, California. Nice location, excellent school. She's also senior editor at the Journal of World Business, one of the most important business journals in international business, and currently also has another appointments. I will not mention all of them. You can look at the website. Thank you so much for being here, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you so much, everyone. It's a great pleasure. My only regret is that I cannot be in Colombia at this point because it's one of those countries I haven't visited yet, and so I've heard many good things. So yes, thank you again for the nice warm introduction. I have several slides prepared about the journal, as well as about my perspective on publication process. So let me share my screen with you, and we should be here. Okay, and then switch this. All right, everybody okay? I don't hear anybody. Can you hear something? Oh, okay, good. All right. Okay, so my perspective here will be primarily from the Journal of World Business, which, of course, I will tell you about, or the accolades, which I was instructed to say by our editor-in-chief, Ajay Gaur. I serve as a senior editor in the area of new ventures, SMEs, and social entrepreneurship. Which, international entrepreneurship is really my area. And I cannot not also tell you, and this is just, one slide that I will dedicate to it, to another online community of scholars, i.e. Scholars, International Entrepreneurship Scholars.net, which is a online, as I said, online community, grassroots community of folks, primarily scholars, but also some practitioners that are dedicated to international entrepreneurship. So if you are interested, please go ahead and become a member. We will be very happy to have you. What we do, we really disseminate research and best practices, pedagogy in this area. But going back to Journal of World Business, some of you may know it. Some of you may know it under the name of Journal of Business in Colombia. That's where it was started in 1965, Columbia University, not Colombia, the country. And we are an IB journal, publishing obviously in the fields such as international business from the strategic perspective, organization theory, but also marketing and finance, which is something that distinguishes us from Journal of International Business Studies, which is more in the strategy kind of area. We have been very proud of over the past 5 years or so in terms of our impact as measured by the impact factor. As you can see there, it has been going up, and I give a big credit to our editor-in-chief, Ajay Gaur, who's doing a fantastic job there. We are rated as 4 by the ABS, and by some of these similar kind of rankings in depending on the other indices. Something that for me is exciting being part of the Journal of World Business editorial team is that I feel we are a journal that is very active, or has been now, at least in the past 5 years, very active in terms of new initiatives, really trying to make the impact. So let me just spend a little bit of time what we have been doing that is new. So we have just initiated just this past month something that we call the Rapid Review Process Initiative, which is essentially a special issue especially call for special issues for papers that are shorter, and as the title suggests, those papers would be reviewed very quickly within 3 weeks, so that we get really the most current, most kind of a cutting edge work from people. In this case, the last one that is has just run was on sustainable development goals. We have another new initiative that we just instituted is this replication corner. So most of you know that journals are, at least the top journals, are always looking for new, novel studies, but we don't pay as much attention to replication. And so this is an initiative that was also instituted. There's the current cycle has been running now since May 1st and will be ending very shortly, July 31st. So if you have something quickly to turn around, you may want to do that. And again, the idea here is that that we address the weakness really of management and social disciplines in general, which is this lack of really building robust knowledge that we can that can be replicated and that where the evidence is really strong, not always just looking for new kind of pieces. Some of the recent issues here that I found also very interesting, challenging the status quo, which has run here lately, obviously in the era of COVID. We had published very quickly some very interesting pieces. Again, for me, very interesting, the one on international entrepreneurship from Shaker Zara, but some of these others as well. As a journal, we feel that we are part of a broader ecosystem. And so another initiative that was started just a couple of years ago is this idea of article transfer with affiliated journals. So we have, working at Elsevier, we have a mechanism through which we can transfer article that may not be necessarily a good fit for us to either IBR, International Business Review, or the Journal of International Management, where, what does it do? Well, essentially, you as an author would get the chance without having to go through another submission process. You would essentially, your article would be sent there, and the idea is that the article will be recommended for publication there, for going through the process, obviously, review process. We are on social media, so if you are not already, please join our Facebook, join our LinkedIn page. If you have anything interesting, maybe if your article was just published in Journal of World Business, please make sure to talk to Vittoria Scalera, who is in charge of our social media, making sure that your articles get face time and that they get broader publicity. So now I'm going to switch gears. I think speaking about the journal is interesting, but I think perhaps for most of the attendees here, which I assume are maybe junior scholars, I was asked to talk a little bit more about the publication process from my perspective. My perspective, of course, is that of author as well as reviewer, as well as editor. So I have been there. I know publication is not an easy process. It's not for the faint of heart. It can be very rough. So what would be my do's and what would be my not do's, don'ts? Obviously, the choice of journal is important. So before you take the jump, think very carefully. I would say even when you start working on a paper or on any study, or even really starting with data collection, you should kind of have an idea where you're going to send the paper. What is the outlet, right? Because right from there, your literature review, everything should then start to fit with what the aims and scope of the journals are, right? Other issues that may come up is turnaround. So again, I feel Journal World Business, we are very proud in a very quick turnaround for us as senior editors. Once I get a paper on my desk, proverbial desk, I have 48 hours to really make some decision, either send it out or desk reject, or just do something with the paper. And the same goes with our, no, not the same, but for our reviewers, we are pretty assertive in having them, return their reviews within reasonable time. Have you published before in a journal? Of course, it helps you get the feel for the journal, how it works. And so that may be another factor in your choice of journals. I would say for junior scholars, obviously, read the papers that have been published in the journal. There is a tone, there is a structure, there is lots of times it will help you in framing it in the right stream of literature. And it does help if you suggest a reviewer to the editor. It doesn't mean that the editor is necessarily going to go with your suggestion, but it always helps. It also signals that you have thought about how this paper would fit and who would be the potential reviewers. And I cannot not mention, please review for the journal. It does not look good if you are trying to publish in a journal and then you decline the request for reviews. It should be really an honor. And I'm totally understand everyone is tight on their schedule, but reviewing is a very important role. And so that would be my advice, is please do review when you're asked. When you submit, right? So once you select the journal, obviously these are kind of obvious, follow the journal format, right? Proofread meticulously. Great title helps. Obviously descriptive, but I personally like titles that have a little life in them, right? That make a reader excited. And abstract too abstract is very, very important, right? That's the first thing anybody reads is the abstract. So make sure, sometimes abstract is sort of the afterthought, all right? You put so much energy into writing the paper, and then just abstract, you may feel like, okay, I'll just put it together, 150 words. But it's important because it's really the first impression. In the cover letter to the editor, just again, try to highlight what you're bringing to the table. What's unique? What's novel? Why should we care? What should make us curious about your study? And very importantly, if you have, and that happens where authors may have large data set that they may have published studies based on it before, make sure that you really outline how is it your paper different than you may have published before. Desk reject, the quick death. What's good about quick death? It's quick. So it's obviously it's painful, but I'd say again, if it's quick, if it's within a few days, just move on, be respectful, and if there are any suggestions, take them to heart, right? Maybe there'll be suggestions where that, other outlets that may be more fitting, or, is there something else? I mean, is this really, sometimes we do get papers that may be actually interesting, but are clearly underdeveloped. It's just, you did not spend enough time to really fine tune and engage with the literature in sufficient depth. over the past a few years, there's this new phenomenon then that's creeping up, which is the reject and resubmit, which we are also starting to do also in Journal Board Business. It's kind of a softer desk reject. It basically means the editor likes what you have there, but he or she feels that reviewers would just not go for it. And it's in a sense to really spare you that long process, that long death possibly, where the editor may just give you suggestions on how to improve the paper and be able to resubmit, right? So that's it's actually very positive. Revise and resubmit, kind of the foot in the door, right? That's the joyful moment. Yes, we have a chance. But of course, then once you start reading the reviews, that may be a little bit when the joy ends. Of course, immediately after reviewers, and we have all gone through it, where we think, oh my goodness, what is this reviewer thinking, right? I mean, don't they get it? Just cool off, right? Sleep on it, give it a few days, and then just start to seriously approach it. High risk revisions, many of those these days. It's always seems to be these days high risk revision. I personally try to do them only really when it's really high risk, meaning, look, you have a lot to do. If you want to resubmit, I'm just giving you a heads up. Think about it twice before. If you have to collect additional data, if you really have to rewrite, maybe the theory that you used, maybe change it. It takes a long time, and so that's for you to kind of assess. Is 3 months enough to get into it? So it's a sort of a very well-meaning warning. If there is a revision 2, right, and sometimes there might be more than one, deciphering reviewer comments is very important. And there are different personas as you read your reviewers' comments, right? There is the happy reviewer. We love them because they like your paper. They let you know. They may have a few minor issues. We would all love to have them. Unfortunately, they are in minority. Many reviewers are unhappy, right? Let's face it. The truth is, many reviewers really look for flaws these days, and particularly in top journal, yes, they are going to identify them, and they'll let you know. The last, the clueless and arrogant reviewer, they're out there too. Hopefully, not as many. But that happens. The clueless reviewer can be sort of a wild card, right? Because they may be not that knowledgeable about what you're going to do. So your role is to educate that person. If it's a methodology issue, spend some time explaining the methodology, provide sites where there were other papers published with that methodology, right? So again, it's on you to educate. Arrogant reviewers, yeah, they're out there too. Unfortunately, we don't like them, and I think that's a role of the editor also sometimes to tone, some of those clearly, abrasive maybe comments. If it does not happen, if you do get some abrasive review, I think it's fortunately easy to just swallow your pride. You never see them, so just go with it anyway. The editor can play obviously an important role there, because especially if you have differing views, right? If you have one reviewer may be happy, the other reviewer may be unhappy. So don't hesitate to seek guidance from an editor as well. What should you do, especially if you have these conflicting reviews? Responses to reviewers. More is more, in my opinion, and in my perspective. Don't blow it up. Don't do these, unless it's just a really simple, simple fix. Just generally spend some time on responding. So more is more. Reiterate the way you understood the comment, especially if you have one of those maybe clueless reviewers or reviewers who are not very, I sometimes, in my own works, I'm like, what do they mean, right? So reiterate how you understood the comment and then respond. Of course, there are comments you can address, you cannot address. My personal philosophy is do as much as you can, give as much as you can, but if there are comments that you cannot address, just state it. And I think most reasonable reviewers and editors understand that there are certain things with data, for example, that you may not be able to address, but give as much as you can, right? Praise the good points, right? I would say always is be, like in life, be polite rather than defensive. As I mentioned before, ask the editor for clarification if needed, and be mindful of resubmission deadline. It still happens, interestingly, even from seasoned authors. It happened to me that, they forget about the headline. And these days, the system, it's not the editor necessarily, but the system just kicks you out. And so be mindful of that. And if you need to ask for, obviously, for extension. Rejection after a revision, I think the picture says it all, right? It can be very emotional. You must have, put a lot of effort in it. That's this, it's not nice, but again, it's better than slow death. So if you get rejection after the first revision, it's still relatively slow. I am the first one to say I had a paper rejected after 4 revisions. I'm not going to mention the journal. I cried. I really cried, but it happens. Of course, the most important thing is don't burn any bridges, right? So even if it can be emotional, just keep those emotions inside. Don't blame the editor. Don't try to get into the fight. It's just not worth it. Revision 2, 3, 4. It can happen. Acceptance, right? That's how we feel at the end. Sometimes the acceptance can be actually not that exciting after all that work, but that's time to celebrate. So yes, that's kind of for me. Again, it's a road that's not very easy, but the end is usually worth it. So yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, I'm just repeating our contact on our social media for Journal of World Business, eScholars.net, again, for those of you who are interested in international entrepreneurship. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I remind you, everybody in the audience, if you have comments or questions, please write them on the chat. I will actually mention them. So just a quick reaction. Yeah, just one question. Where would you recommend to get topics for new research? I mean, I understand related to world business or to your journal.
Right.
What would you do? What would the successful authors do?
Well, I think, current things. And in fact, we again, Journal of World Business, we pride ourselves, and we have an award even for papers that are phenomenon driven. So there are certain phenomena that are cutting edge, obviously COVID these days, right? Mm-hmm. But we have digitization, we have, the bifurcated world now geopolitically. So I think try to really do something that is relevant. And I think we all know that much of academic research is it's interesting to us to read it, to few of us, but if you can really make it relevant to practitioners as well, I think that's my biggest advice. We don't need another study on entrepreneurial orientation, right? That thing has been sort of over, unless it's something really unique. Just try to really get out of there. And again, I'm sorry if I'm really maybe boasting on Journal of Business so much, but I'm really excited about our journal that we do sometimes take a risk in that sense that, okay, it might not be completely, there might be some weakness in methodology, mm-hmm. but if it's a really interesting topic, we tend to make an error rather on publishing it than rejecting simply based on rigor. Still rigorous. Don't get me wrong. We must publish rigorously, but the interesting part is so important.
Thanks so much. I'm inviting to the panel Professor Garay. He used to be the academic chair, and he's going to be the next president in the future. So I'm inviting him also to the panel. While Professor Daniel Rotek, you can actually try your presentation. I will present you in the meantime. Professor Daniel Rotek is Professor of International Business and Global Strategic Management at Florida Gulf Coast. Nice locations, you are both of you. Florida and San Diego, California. That's excellent. He has been awarded the 2019 Academy of International Business Service Excellence Award for his editorship of AIB Insight. And he has served as editor and senior editor in different journals. So he has plenty of experience in this business research publishing arena. So, Daniel, thank you so much for being here, and please go ahead. I don't know if I don't hear you. Daniel, you're mute. I cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think somehow I got muted here. So welcome everyone. Real quick before I get started, can you see my slides just as a heads up? You can see my slides, and I just want to put them on my primary monitor here and be able to switch them. Okay, so now I think they should be bigger. Okay, so welcome everyone. Great presentation, Martina. Hard to follow you. I took a lot of notes. Great advice. You know, I think Martina and I, even though we haven't spoken before, we have some of the same pieces of advice. You know, that Jedi mind trick. So hopefully I'm not being too repetitive and can add to that conversation. Thank you very much, Sergio and Ricardo and everyone inviting me to this panel. I love Colombia. I've been there several times. You know, ¿cómo estás a todos? A mí me gusta Colombia mucho. You know, it's a great country. You know, similar to what Martina said, I wish I could be there with you in person, but hopefully next year everything will be back to normal, whatever that new normal will look like, and we'll be able to see each other in person again. So what I would like to do is, you know, I have a good connection to Latin America. I'm actually German by citizenship, born and raised in Germany. I'm also U.S. American. I have a dual citizenship, having lived in the U.S. for about 20 years, but kind of my heart is in Latin America. I love Latin America. Mi esposa es colombiana, from Cartagena. So, you know, I teach in Santiago de Chile at University Católica every year. You know, I've taught at FGV in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I teach in Bolivia at UPB, Universidad Privada Boliviana. I've visited most of Latin America. I really like the region, and I'm always happy to contribute to conferences in Latin America. And the last one I've actually been to was Unpatch. Some of you might know Unpatch in Brazil, which I believe is, after the Academy of Management, the second biggest management conference in the world. So they're doing a great job in Brazil, and I'm so glad to see that Colombia is getting on the map and very strong and organizing these wonderful conferences. I know Universidad de los Andes is involved. I was fortunate enough to visit Universidad de los Andes in 2016, I believe, 5 years ago. And you know, back in the times when we were still able to travel. So I'm really, really happy to be part of this Latin American conference. What I would like to do is, Sergio, you know, talk about a couple of journals quickly, but then do what Ricardo asked us to do, to share my advice for publishing, similar to what Martina did. But let me just quickly talk about a couple of journals. And the first journal, let me see if I can switch this. I don't know if you can see this. I think I went 2 slides too far. Here it is. It's called the International Journal of Emerging Markets. I've, you know, recently for the last few years, done more and more research and teaching in the field of emerging markets. I know the Journal of World Business does some of that work as well. Martina, you know, knows better. But this is, you know, a journal which is published by Eberl, which wants to establish itself as the premier outlet in emerging market research. And I've just communicated with the editor, who is working out of Norway now. He used to be in the US, a Harvard Kennedy Fellow, and it has now been ranked by one of those journal rankings from Italy as an A journal. It's a solid B journal in most rankings. You see the impact and citation scores. So it's on the way up to be a very strong journal. You know, on the way to be the premier journal in emerging market research. I used to serve as a senior editor, and you know, I'm still on the editorial review board. And you know, this is a journal you may want to look into from a Latin American perspective. Of course, you know, several emerging markets in the region, to see if you can publish your research in that journal, which is entirely focused on emerging market research. Okay. Another journal I want to bring up, and I'd be happy to answer questions for both journals in our Q&A round, is AIB Insights. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Academy of International Business. which is my academic home, next to the Academy of Management. And the Academy of International Business actually has 3 journals, the flagship research journal, JIBS, I'm sure all of you know, Journal of International Business Studies. Then they have a relatively new one, which is called the Journal of International Business Policy, which is actually kind of trying to bridge the gap between business and public policy research. And then we have AIB Insights, which has been around for 20 years now. And actually at this year's AIB conference, which was online, we had a nice celebration, 20 years of AIB Insights as a journal. I served as an editor and associate editor for 6 years for the maximum term, 3 years as associate editor and 3 years as editor. That's what the AIB, the Academy of Management says, those 3-year rotating terms. So I've been with the journal for almost 1/3 of its life. And this journal is actually focused on shorter articles. I think Martina mentioned that the Journal of World Business has that new initiative now on shorter articles with Ajay Gower, who I know well, and I know Jonathan Doe, the previous editor, I know him well. He talks about that phenomenon-based research, and this is what AIB research does, right? AIB Insights. So very phenomenon-based research, free of a lot of technical jargon, but getting to the point, publishing very current, very relevant, very phenomenon-based kind of research, which then allows business practitioners to make evidence-based decisions rather than just make decisions based on reading all of our academic publications, which many practitioners don't quite understand. So I encourage you to look into AIB Insights, because I think that would be a wonderful outlet for especially scholars also in Latin America to publish your work from your area and bring it into our mainstream literature here in the US and around the world. So these are the 2 journals I at least wanted to mention. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions about each of those 2 in the Q&A round. But let me just quickly go over to my contribution to this panel, my research advice. Now, let me start with the big picture, okay? When I was in my doctoral program, one of my professors, it's been a while now, but one of my professors always said, research means conversation, okay? So you want to be part of a specific conversation in your field and then basically contribute through your research activities. And if you think about this research as conversation, usually starts with your big idea, right? The big, light bulb, Thomas Alva Edison, who, by the way, had his winter home here where I'm located in Southwest Florida, about 30 minutes from my house. And he has a big laboratory there. We usually see that big light bulb. So he had those big ideas, right? More than 1,000 patents for things he invented. And this is very similar, right? That you might have that big idea. And then, of course, the end of that road would be that you publish in a journal, such as that wonderful Journal of World Business or any of the other journals I mentioned or you target. But there's a lot in between, okay? There's a lot in between. And I think this is the, to unpack, the process is that you should, not just, write down your big idea and submit to a journal right away. What you should do, in my opinion, talk to colleagues. And you, by being part of conferences like this, you're able to, network and find colleagues in your field. And I've seen Martina, she, did a little ad for that entrepreneurship network, connect with people in your field and just have a conversation, connect with them. Nowadays online, when we're back to normal, in face-to-face, and just discuss your idea and see whether that idea is relevant, whether it is interesting, whether it is current, and whether there might be something there before you even start submitting to a journal and maybe waste your time and the time of editors and reviewers before really, developing your idea. What you also want to do is you want to, work with other people, get as much opinions as you can. I will, tell you this later. One of the things I like to say is that, you get nasty reviews from a friendly reviewer, meaning before you submit to a journal, tap into your network and send your papers, your paper manuscripts to friendly reviewers, people who know you, but who give you a nasty review so that you really are prepared before you're submitting to a journal. And then, of course, what you want to do is you want to present your idea, maybe at your own university or at smaller type of meetings. You want to present it at bigger meetings, such as this conference or any type of conferences. And then, of course, you want to submit and deal with the review process. Martina has already talked about, and I'll make some comments as well. So what I want to do is, for the rest of my time, give you 10 pieces of advice. So when preparing for our session today, I thought about what are the top 10 kind of pieces of advice I can share with you. And I have basically categorized them into some groups, and the first group would be prior to submitting to any of those journals you want to publish in. Number 2, developing and submitting your papers, and number 3, the review process, and then I have some general advice. So let's get right into it. Okay, so prior to submitting to a journal, the first thing which came to my mind is that, have something to say, okay? So you want to carefully select that conversation you want to be part of, okay? My field is international strategy. I do a lot of work on international mergers and acquisitions. I talk about equity-based entry modes, performance determinants of multinational corporations. More recently, I do a lot of work in the field of emerging markets in the context of those international acquisitions and institutions and how they shape the strategies of multinational corporations. I know Martina talked about international entrepreneurship as her primary field. So you want to carefully select the conversation you want to be part of, rather than just publish right and left and up and down, and you don't really know what conversation you're contributing to. And you want to have something to say, okay? Something to say meaning you really want to contribute to the conversation rather than just repeat what other people say, or just make very trivial kind of contribution. So what you should not do, right? I try to structure my presentation in do's and don'ts. What you should not do is just to publish anything for the sake of getting published. I haven't tested this yet, but I would surmise if I would ask our PhD students if they would publish a blank paper in a top journal just to have that top journal publication on their records, they would probably say yes, right? Even though that blank paper doesn't really say anything. And I've seen this, unfortunately. I don't know how Martina feels, but sometimes I see papers, even the top journals, which don't really say much. And you really want to focus on what is your contribution, what do you want to say, rather than just focus on that publication itself. Number 2, be passionate about the topic and the field. If you're not passionate about what you're researching about, life will be very boring, and so will be your job. So if you're passionate about a field, a topic, and you are all scholars in Latin America, you know your country's best. I remember every time I was at the conference in Peru a couple of years ago in Lima, and I've given a similar presentation, and they asked me and said, what do you think is a good research topic here in Peru? And I said, why do you ask the Blanquito from Alemania? I'm from Germany and I live in the US. You know best, what is interesting right now in Peru, and you should really be passionate about that topic and then find a way to communicate this in a scholarly way. So be passionate, like what you do, become an expert in your field, and then the publications at the end of the day, in my opinion, should take care of themselves if you follow the proper process. So what you shouldn't do, is to just publish the flavor of the day. Now, I don't mean, flavor of the day, current issues, okay? We just talked about this, I think, when Sergio asked his question to Martina about, how do you find new topics? Clearly, COVID, is an important topic. And we have actually published a special issue in AIB Insights just recently on COVID last year in 2020, very timely, on the implications on international business. So I don't mean that. Okay, so current issues are good. Current developments are really good. Phenomenon-based research, what Jonathan Doe, the former editor of Journal of World Business, was pushing, and Martina mentioned again, is very important. But flavor of the day just means that you think, oh, this is something, you get a quick publication in, but you're not really an expert in that field. You're just trying to write something up to get a publication. You really need to contribute to a specific conversation. So if you want to, for example, publish on COVID-19 in your field, make sure that you're an expert in your field and say, how does COVID-19 really impact your field of study, right? So picking on Martina now, she is an expert in international entrepreneurship. So what does it mean for international entrepreneurship? And building on the field of international entrepreneurship, should we look at different theoretical lenses? Should we look at, different kind of frameworks to now, add that, pandemic component to our theoretical models in order to explain, all those outcome variables in international entrepreneurship? This is kind of a contribution you want to be looking for. Okay, number 3, be relevant, be interesting, and be important. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that whatever you publish has some relevancy. And we just talked about this. We are an applied field, international business. So we don't want to find just the next gap in the literature. We want to see, what does that really mean for companies, for multinational corporations, maybe for governments, when you think about, let's say, different institutional environments in Latin America, and what does that mean for the strategies of companies? So you want to be relevant. You want to have something which really has some meaning, which people can use to make better decisions, right? Whether it's business practitioners or policymakers, you name it. Or what does it mean for pedagogy, for example, right? We're all educators at the same time. What does it mean for our classrooms? I do a lot of executive education here in the United States. And, you know, I always think about, you know, how can I translate my work into a language executives can understand? All those vice presidents and top level executives I'm teaching, how can they use, you know, the results of my research to make better evidence-based decisions and become more successful? Okay, that's what relevancy means. It has to be important. Okay, you need to study something which really has some importance to our field, and it has to be interesting. And if you think about interesting, there's an interesting article, no pun intended, an interesting article about something interesting. And I have that green button here. Let me see if that works. I've been playing with PowerPoint this morning. Here we go. Murray Davis, I'm sure Martina knows, and Sergio. It's called Towards a Phenomenology of Sociology and the Sociology of Phenomenology. You know, my German is still, you know, making it a hard time. But this is an article which was actually published, look at this, in 1971, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, and I give that to my students, my PhD students, my even sometimes, you know, colleagues who haven't come across this yet. And if you would read this now, you wouldn't believe it was published 50 years ago. It's still very timely. And Murray Davis talks about what is interesting research, oftentimes taking the opposite point of view than, you know, what is common norm, for example, right? Questioning common assumptions. So if you want to take a look at that article, you know, that will give you a very, very good idea about what I mean with what is interesting research and may inform what you want to do. So Sergio, this is a partial question, a partial answer to your question about how do you find new topics. Read that article, and I'm sure that light bulb I've shown you earlier, that Thomas Alva Edison light bulb will become very, very, very bright. Okay, what should you not do? Okay. Merely search for gaps in the literature. Okay, that's what we see. You know, why don't we sell ice cream on the moon? Okay, I know Richard Branson just, you know, went up with Virgin Galactic and visited the moon, and Elon Musk, you know, wants to start a little, you know, a billionaires club up there. But, you know, why don't we sell ice cream on the moon? Duh. Okay, there's no people to buy that ice cream, and, you know, you don't even know what type of consistency that ice cream should have in order to be able to be enjoyed up there. So the idea here is gaps in the literature. There's always gaps. And sometimes there's a reason why there's a gap, because it's not interesting and it's not relevant and it's not important at the same time. Okay, so think about this more from a relevancy, from an importance and interesting perspective, rather than just because there's a gap because no one has looked at it. There might be a reason for that. Okay, so now main category 2, developing and submitting your papers. So this is basically my fourth piece of advice for you. Number 4, submit to journals at the right time. Okay, so research is a process. I think we talked about this, right? Developing your idea, presenting it at conferences, networking with people, becoming, and I can only second Martina's suggestion of becoming a reviewer. And if you're kind of hesitant, you know, to become a reviewer for a journal of a caliber as the Journal of World Business, you know, you can start being a reviewer for a conference and test out the waters, those of you who are not as experienced yet, and then become a reviewer for journals afterwards. But reviewing for conferences and journals gives you an idea of what is currently being published, what is currently being submitted to journals. So you get a good idea about what is currently, you know, the conversation you want to be part of. You know, friendly reviewer that give nasty reviews, I think I've already mentioned this. You know, this is always a good testing the waters, that you have a good network of colleagues who can give you some feedback, because you know, everyone is somewhat biased, right? That they believe, you know, whatever they write is the best in the world and the most current and the most interesting, but it may not be so in the field. So it's always good to have a good network of friends who can give you a more objective type of feedback. So what should you not do? Don'ts. Hold on, let me click on that one. The don'ts. Hold on. Here it is. Now I clicked too quickly. Don't prematurely submit your journals, right? Don't use journals to test your incomplete work or randomly submit just to any journal. And I know Martina can probably speak to that as well. You know, what is always nice for us in editorial roles is to see good work and help develop authors to develop their work and make it better. But whenever we see things which are not developed at all, and we see this is, you know, not even editorial review, there's typos in there, there's no structure, you know, authors who submit haven't even read articles in that journal they submit to, and, you know, the idea is not really developed, then you get to that, you know, quick death. Martina mentioned, that desk reject, but desk reject ties up resources as well, right? It ties up resources of the journal editor and the senior editors, and you don't want to build a reputation of someone who has whatever 95% of desk rejects, and then people may not even look at your article anymore because they think you're submitting prematurely. So keep that in mind. I think that has helped at least me to think about my publications when I was starting in this field. Carefully select the right journal, and I think these Meet the Editor sessions are really valuable, that you learn about different type of journals and what kind of research they publish. Read those journals. I think Martina mentioned this as well. Read the Journal of World Business and all the other journals I mentioned, AIB Insights and the International Journal of Emerging Markets and all the other ones you want to publish in, so that you see what type of articles are published, what type of topics are being published, what type of structure that paper has, and make sure that you select that target journal you want to publish in very, very carefully. Okay, so what you should not do is submit the right article to the wrong journal. That would be an opportunity lost, right? You have a great piece of research there, but you just submit to the wrong journal because they don't publish your type of research, or submit the wrong article to the right journal, because that will then lead to that quick death of a desk reject, and then take time and resources to turn that around for another journal as well. So make that selection carefully. Number 6, target your paper to that specific journal. So what you want to do is clearly read the journal, read authors who publish in that journal, know which other colleagues are part of your conversation, so that you cite their work because they're part of their conversation, because these colleagues who are active in your field are very likely going to be your reviewers. And if you don't reference the seminal work in the field, including the work of those potential reviewers, then that may send the wrong signal, that you may not have done a comprehensive search in your field, and you don't really understand the breadth of the literature and the contributions. Okay, what should you not do? Don't, of course, neglect to adjust your paper to that specific journal, so that you don't use that journal structure and that journal's reference style, and that you don't build on what has been published in that journal in earlier issues, because this is sending a signal to the editor and senior editors that you haven't really taken your homework or done your homework and really looked into that journal and just randomly submitted in order to see if you have a shot. Okay, all right. Number 7. And number 7, 8, 9, and 10 referred to the review process. I think this was Martina's, core part of her presentation, so I hope I'm not too repetitive at this point. But understand that rejection is reality. Okay, so don't be too confused. Don't be too sad. I know Martina said she was crying after 4 revisions. I would have probably done the same. But if you get that rejection from the outset, that might be a good thing. Okay, maybe you've submitted the right paper, but just to a wrong journal. That would be a good outlet. So you may have to go and find the right journal for your right paper, for that good paper, right? If you submitted the wrong paper to the right journal, maybe you're lucky to have that reject and resubmit, and then you can restructure it. But just make sure rejection is reality. This is what our field is about, and we just have to get used to it. It's almost like any sport, right? That you lose sometimes. This is reality, and you can then come out stronger and celebrate the next victory when you're successful again. Okay, and when you get a rejection, learn from those comments. I know Martina mentioned this as well, and I have that second bullet point here. Many of you may not know who I'm talking about. He has retired by now, so that's why I can mention his name. But when I was in my doctoral program, one of my professors, his name was John Bernard, and he was one of the biggest persons in human resource management, and he has, I think, 20+ publications in the Journal of Human Resource Management, which is the top journal in his field. And he was able to call the editor if there was a reject and say, what's going on? Why did you reject my paper? Okay. So, but this was probably the only one I've come across in my career as a professor for 13 years now, someone who's that influential. By the way, he was the editor of that journal, and, he gave it to all those junior editors saying, you don't even understand. But the idea is, unfortunately, most of us are not in that position, right? So what we should do is we should be nice to thank the editor and senior editors for, considering our paper, to thank them for their comments, and then really, sleep a good night over it, wake up the next morning before you reply, and then, look at, there might be something there you will learn, okay, from those comments that you can make your paper stronger. So rejection is not necessarily a bad thing if you can look at the positive side of it. And there's always a positive side to things. So what you should not do, don't react prematurely, okay? Because then you burn the bridges. And in our field, right, international business is a global village. Everyone at some point in time interacts with everyone else, okay? I think there was that study, you know, how many degrees of freedom are between two random people in the world. And I think they said about 5, I believe, or 7. I don't remember that number. I think in our today's world with social media and connecting with international business, probably just 1 or 2 degrees of freedom, that everyone knows each other with maybe 1 or 2 people in between. So it you know, don't burn your bridges, okay? It may backfire, so always be nice, even though if you're a little upset about the rejection. That's just the reality. Okay, number 8, appreciate, revise, and resubmit. That's good, right? I think Martina had that foot in the door picture on there, which is, I think, great. Revise and resubmit is actually a good thing, okay? I have never gotten my papers published right away, okay? And I don't know if anyone has in our field that you submit a paper, they say, congratulations, 2 days later, fully published tomorrow, okay? It never happens. So you always have to revise your paper, and that's a good thing, right? That makes you a better scholar and a better you know, a better researcher by doing this, okay? So, and major R&Rs are very common, okay? So no worries about this. Set up that timeline. Again, now I'm a little bit repetitive. Martina talked about it, but make sure that you can do it in those 3 months, that you see what you have to do and whether it's possible. Set up your timeline, make sure that you stick to it, and you know, don't get confused or upset. This is actually a good thing, right? So don't get frustrated, don't give up prematurely. Okay, couple more points. Number 9, proactively work with the associate editor. This is somewhat very important, and I think Martina talked about those happy and unhappy and arrogant and clueless reviewers. And what I always try to tell authors I'm working with is that at the end of the day, senior editors such as Martina or editors, okay, they make the decision, not the reviewers, okay? So if you're frustrated with, you know, a specific reviewer because you believe that the reviewer is clueless or is arrogant or unhappy for whatever reason, you can still communicate with the editor or senior editor, right? So be positive, okay? Always say, you know, no matter how frustrated you are, you know, that you appreciate the comments of that specific whatever arrogant reviewer, but you politely disagree because of this and this and this. You know, you should argue almost like a lawyer. Okay, I think if you look at colleagues who have a legal degree, which are not many, but they're usually very good writers because they know how to structure an argument and how to really, you know, bring a point across. And that's how you should think. Okay, think like a lawyer, you know, when you're in court and you want to structure an argument, why you think in a certain way, and then provide your evidence. And that's how you can convince people. And the editor or senior editor, you know, that's not a blind review process. You can address them and try to convince them that whatever comment a reviewer made is just actually not relevant or not important or completely wrong because they might be clueless or arrogant, and you can then convince the senior editor or editor and convince them. They make the final decision, okay? So work with them, okay? So what you should not do, don't. By the way, when I'm looking down, I'm not falling asleep. I'm looking at my second monitor where I have all my slides. So not trusting the systems, right? Editors rule. Reviewers don't rule, right? They just give feedback, and you know, you give feedback to them. But the editors are those which rule. So you should work with them if you're frustrated. Okay, number 10. When accepted, you know, crossing the finish line, we are now having the Olympics in Tokyo. So, you know, when they cross the finish line, they're done. But, you know, when you get an acceptance letter, that's not the finishing line yet, because you have to still sign a lot of paperwork and you have to do that typesetting revision and you have to make sure that everything is in order. So don't start celebrating quite yet, okay? So you want to make sure the finish line is, you know, when you have submitted your final version, typeset version to the publisher and, you know, they have signed off, okay? So make sure that you don't forget to do this. A lot of people start celebrating too early and then suddenly they find mistakes later on. And I will tell you later what I mean with this, you know, as my last comment in a minute. Okay, so what you should not do, right? Think that the acceptance decision is the finish line. There's still a few tasks you need to do in order to get your paper published. Okay, so in order to wrap up my presentation, here's some general advice, okay? So number 1, build a reputation, okay? So carefully select the conversation you want to be part of and build a reputation you feel that you are an expert in your field, that you really contribute to that specific reputation, conversation. Number 2, my slides are a little slow here. I don't know why. Sometimes they change. Okay, here we go. Have a portfolio of multiple projects at different stages. Okay, this is more toward, I think, PhD students. Ricardo told me that we have a very mixed audience, so I try to kind of have advice for, you know, every stage in your career, whether you're a PhD student or you're a junior or senior scholar. So, you know, always having a portfolio of projects at different stages of development, some under R&R, some under development, some maybe just at the idea stage, I think is very valuable for you, you know, to think in a portfolio kind of setting. Publish a lot, right? Quantity increases your chances of impact. Okay, there's a good book by Adam Grant called Originals, and he talks about how to get good ideas across. And he talked about Albert Einstein, who published a lot, right? And who didn't get the Nobel Prize for, you know, his relativity theory. He got it for some photosynthetic effect for photography. So what you do, he published a lot, and then that increases your chance of actually making an impact, rather than just think about, oh, you know, I'm going to just publish 2 articles a year, and then if they fall through, you don't publish at all. So, you know, think about, you know, a portfolio. Publish in different types of journals, okay, so that you have an idea about, you know, different outlets for your research. I know many of you are familiar with Gerd Hofstede, you know, the cross-cultural expert who unfortunately passed away last year, right before the pandemic. I was fortunate enough to get him to know in person some 15 years ago and stayed in touch with him. And when he published his original work on his cultural dimensions in the 1980s and 90s, he didn't publish in A journals, not even B journals. He published in a very diverse set of journals, but his impact in the real world is really, really, you know, relevant and important. Okay, so so think about, you know, a different portfolio strategy than just looking at one target. Shoot for special issues. Okay, special issues sometimes, you know, have an accelerated, a quicker way to publish your work. They are very focused on a specific topic that may help you to get your paper published if that's about a specific conversation you're part of. Think outside the box. Okay, now we have, I told you, the Academy of Management now for a couple of years has their Journal of International Business Policy. So they're now trying to say, you know, we should not only think in the box of international business, we should also think in, you know, terms of international policy, so that we, you know, our research findings inform policymakers to make better decisions. So try to connect fields, try to connect disciplines, and I think that has a very good chance of relevant and impactful work. Do qualitative and quantitative literature reviews. Okay, I know this is mostly targeted toward PhD students, but I think even seasoned scholars should do that, that you do literature reviews to understand your field, you know, better from a different perspective, maybe even reading, you know, articles in different fields and different academic disciplines on your topic. You know, one of my fields is institutional theory. There's a lot of work on institutions, not only in business, but in economics and sociology, in many different fields, and then trying to bring this back to our field and do those reviews. I've recently started doing some bibliometric analyses. This is a, you know, literature review technique. I've published a couple of meta-analyses. So that gives you a much better idea about where the literature are and where it may go. And Sergio, this is another partial answer to your question. How do you get ideas, right? Do a literature review and then, or read literature reviews which are published, because good literature reviews, especially if they're published in top journals, they should always have a significant section on future avenues for research. Okay, so not just descriptively summarizing what the literature says, but prospectively or prescriptively looking toward the future, saying, you know, here are things which need to be addressed, and that would give you some good ideas for future research. Summarize your research in a big question. I did this for AIB Insights when I was editor. I asked all of my authors to write one big question which basically summarizes what their research is about. And I think this goes back to what Martina said about the title and the abstract, which you should usually write last. Okay, at least that's what I do. I write my abstract and my introduction always last, okay, when the paper is written. And the title should be kind of catching, right? Think about the newspaper. You open a newspaper, you only read, you know, where there's a, you know, good title, which is interesting. And that's the same for research. So the title should really capture what your paper is about, but the abstract should have that big question in it. You know, why is what you do relevant? And think about in question mark terms, that you can, you know, if you are not able to phrase your research in one question, then maybe you don't really understand what you're doing yourself. You've got to be able to communicate this, right? So that other people who are not experts understand what you do. Introduction section, I think I just mentioned this. I write this last. This is the most important thing. Usually when I review papers, I read this first. If the first 2-3 pages for me are key, okay? Either they capture me as a reviewer saying, oh, this is well written. They really position their their paper in the literature. They're really, focus on the expected contributions. That big question they have in there is really interesting and really, insightful, if you will. But the opposite is equally true, right? If you have a boring introduction, you don't see anything relevant there, you don't see any, connection to the literature, you kind of are biased reading the rest of that paper, and that may not be a good sign, right? If your introduction is not, well done. And then, of course, know your strengths and weaknesses as a team. Sergio, again, a partial answer to your question. If you work in a team of colleagues, maybe you discuss collective ideas, okay? And then you use your individual strengths. Sometimes more. Someone has more skills in methodology, and others more in theory, and someone is that idea kind of person. So if you work in a team, you can come up with new ideas and do well. Okay, and I think this is my second to last slide. Become a reviewer. We talked about this as early as possible. This is just repeating what Martina said, either at conferences or journals. Become an editor. I encourage all of you to do that, because then you sit on the other side and you understand, what it takes, to be published from an editorial perspective. Be close to your university, but, I always say be closer to your academy. So if your university doesn't expect you to publish top-level research, you may still want to consider it, because your academy, whatever your academy is, for me, it's the Academy of International Business, you always want to be, part of that conversation and do the best you can. Build a network of colleagues. I think I've already mentioned this. That practical advice, I have here for PhD students to use a reference software such as EndNote and any of the others, Mendeley. I usually ask my students to do that, and they are not aware. That makes your life very easy. Okay, so to finish up, okay, there's a good quote by Kurt Lewin. There's nothing as practical as good theory, and I want to extend that a little bit. You don't understand theory until it's tested empirically, and you don't understand the topic until you taught it successfully. So whether you for your students or for executives, what I do a lot here, if you cannot communicate what you do to people who are not experts in their field, you may not even understand what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, and try to do that. Try to put this in words to explain that to other people who are not in your field, and then you really understand what you're doing. And this is my last piece of advice. Okay, if you remember when I said advice number 10. That the acceptance letter is not the finish line yet. You have to do a lot of work. Everyone says, okay, that it's very hard to publish, right? Everyone says, oh, it's so hard to get published, especially in A journals. But you know what? What is even more difficult than getting published? It's to get unpublished. Because once your paper is published, it's there forever. And you want to make sure that you give it your best shot, okay? So don't just publish that empty paper without any contribution. And maybe you're lucky and you get through the system and you have that great publication, but your name will be attached to this forever, okay? So from that perspective, when you look at your publications from the beginning of your idea until the end, selecting the right journal and crossing the finishing line, to even look at little typos and give it a very careful read to make sure that that paper you publish is your brainchild and that you're going to be proud of this for the rest of your life. Okay, that's it from my part. Okay, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. Here we go. That's my thank you slide.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for a complete and very energetic presentation. I don't know if Martina, do you have an initial reaction or something to add?
I think, it was remarkable how many overlaps, but in a productive way. So I just appreciate it. Very, very, very to the point.
Thanks.
Thank you, Martina.
In the audience, I don't know if you have other questions. Well, there's one question of, I guess, great presentation. Thank you. They are asking if you can provide the presentation so we can post them. I don't know. You can answer that later. If you can provide, we can post it in the Balas site. In any case, the recordings of this session will be posted, so you can also look at this presentation again. I have one question. Urbi, if you have something, please interrupt me. I have one question that we have, here in Latin America, I would say, or in emerging markets. We understand the argument that probably you need to get a feed between your article and the journal. But one of the problems is that some interesting things here in Latin America or for Latin American markets not necessarily are relevant for, Germany or for Anglo-Saxon journals, because I mean the state of development and the type of problems that we face are kind of different. So I understand it's a difficult question, but how can you actually promote a Latin American relevant article in a, let's say, global, to a good global prestigious journal?
I'll let Daniel first, please.
I'll take a shot of it, Martina. We work as a team. But off the top of my head, the idea is, I think it's in a way, I'm throwing the ball back to you. Remember what I told you about Peru? Yeah. When people in Peru ask me, that Blanquito from Alemania who lives in the US, what is relevant in Peru? I don't know. So it's you're the expert on your context. Okay, if you think about international research or international business, I think that's a field of studying context. Because every country or every region has a different context. And studying that context, I think, is our big contribution as international business scholars. So given that you are experts on the context of Latin America, and I know Latin America is very, deceiving, because there's no such thing, in my opinion, as Latin America. There's Colombia, there's Peru, and there's Argentina. And when you bring Brazil in, with their Portuguese background, they're completely different than the rest of Latin America. So I think really studying, your context, what is different, the rules of the game. Remember, Douglas North talked about institutions as the rules of the game. So how those rules of the game are different in your specific context, and what are the implications, let's say, for Anglo-Saxon multinational corporations operating in your field? Boom, you got the connection, right? So you need to connect it. So why should we in the Anglo-Saxon, kind of region read about, something about Colombia? Okay, because there are companies which establish business operations in Colombia, and they need to know A, B, and C in order to be successful. So I think the ball is in your corner to kind of show that relevancy, why your research is relevant for scholars, let's say in the United States or in Western Europe, and they want to read this. And then you would be the expert. I don't think anyone in the US or anyone in Europe would be better able to tackle that topic than you in Latin America, because you grew up there. You live in that context every day. You know what it takes to analyze, your specific, let's say, institutional environment, right? The political environment, the economic, the legal environment, the cultural environment, and what does that really mean for foreign companies? If you just publish a paper domestically on Colombia, let's say from an entrepreneurship perspective, how to be a successful entrepreneur in Bogota, right, in the flower business, that may not be as relevant, right, unless you tie it to the fact that Colombia has 27% of the world market in flowers, which I know because I visited that cluster outside of Bogota, and boom, here you have that international relevancy, right? 27% is quite big. And what does that mean for international trade? What does that mean for competition, analysis perspectives? What does it mean from a location advantage? Why does Bogota produce 27% of the flowers? What does it mean, from a multinational perspective? Okay, so I think it is up to the author to develop that link of why their work is relevant, and I see a lot of opportunities to do that. Okay. Thank you.
Martina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree with everything. Just maybe two small minor points. One is if you feel it's not interesting for the context, that there must be something different. So what is different? Is the phenomenon? Is there something about assumptions? Is the institutional? So yes, as Daniel said, describe it, and that's related to my second point. I see lots of studies that are set in different contexts, and they all start with, we are testing this in the context of emerging economies. This is, let's say, from Colombia, and that's it. I think this could be actually your selling point. Have actually a section on the context itself, how different it is. What are the unique aspects, dynamics within that context? Is it so make it a selling point, right? Say this is a unique data set. Don't just try to sort of shove it under the rug. Just say, okay, it's emerging, but how is it different? Devote some space to it in your paper, because that can be a selling point. So yeah, use it as a strength.
Thank you so much. Fernando from the audience, he's saying also that similarities may also be relevant. Most theories developed in the US, Europe are also applied to Latin America. So, sort of in the replication kind of argument, you know, that some of the theories, normally we took them directly from authors in the Northern Hemisphere, and we applied them here. And I mean, and it's nice to know that they work. Some other question. We have a couple of minutes left. I have one, and one related to Jesus Huyumaya. He says, "Thank you, Daniel. What do you think of the delays in delivering the reviews of the manuscript? Any advice to face 5 or more months of waiting for the review? Apart from patience, I guess, and dealing with the frustration. Probably the portfolio argument is one that is important. But Daniel, please."
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, you know, what to do if you have a long waiting time, right? So 5 months or more. Well, I think that goes back to the initial, you know, selection of the journal you want to publish in. Okay, if you just submit to a random journal and you have not educated yourself of how long the review time is, then I think you haven't done your homework properly. And I think what Martina said, that the Journal of World Business wants the review very quickly. Did I get that correctly, Martina? 3 weeks or something? And we've been trying that too. That you know, the editors of those journals I'm involved with, they really push senior editors to turn them around very quickly, 1 or 2 days, to assign reviewers within 7 days, to basically tell the reviewers to get back in a certain period of time. And they hold reviewers accountable now. I think, unfortunately, I mean, if I would be able to redesign the system, I would, you know, make that reviewer job much more formal and have like an incentive system and a tracking system. You know, I mean, we have it for everything. We rate movies and Uber drivers, but we don't rate reviewers enough, in my opinion. But we should have that system. And unfortunately, since we don't have it, I think journals don't do themselves a favor by having those long review times, because then they build a reputation of being very slow, and you know, slowness is not being rewarded in today's, you know, academic world. So I think, you know, by being connected, remember when I showed you my first slide about what it takes from your big idea with the light bulb until publication, if you publish before you publish your paper, even submit it, you know, present it at conferences, talk to people, go to meet the editor sessions, and learn about what the review times are at different journals. You know, talk to colleagues who have papers under review, talk to editors and ask about the review time. And then you can, in a better way, target your manuscript to a specific journal, and then therefore, you know, not even face that problem in the first place. Now, if you are currently facing that problem, I don't know if this was the background of your question, that you're now suddenly waiting and it's already 5 months. What I would recommend, send a letter to the senior editor who was basically in charge of that paper, or even to the editor, and just make them aware. You know, don't be hesitant. Okay, editors are colleagues. Okay, like you and I, and they understand this. They said, you know what, you have submitted that paper 5 months ago. You haven't heard anything back. You know, you're a little bit concerned. Could you kindly be positive? Could you kindly, you know, check on the status of my paper, because we'd really like to have a decision to move forward in the process. So I would not be hesitant to send an email to the senior editor in charge of the paper, just to find out what's going on, because 5 months is a pretty long time. It shouldn't have taken that long. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Martina, do you have any thoughts? There's also a question by Juan Sosa. What is the average time of a review in the journals that you...
Yeah, just to correct Danielle, the 21-day process is only for a rapid review, so it's not 3 weeks. Yeah, it's, you know, we generally, right, we would like to get within the first 3 months a review. But yes, I would say absolutely go and ask the editor. From my personal experience, just actually had a paper, I'm not going to name the journal, that was under review for over a year.
Wow.
And our last thing was the paper, because it's just, you know, it's not right to have a for paper to be in such a long time under, and that was despite us asking the senior editor what's going on with the paper. So we almost moved the paper, and that sort of started to move the wheels. But yeah, I think ask the editor, but obviously do not bug them every 2 weeks. But I think after 3 months, you should probably start to inquire.
Urbi, do you have any further questions, please?
Yeah, I think the presentations were great, and I really enjoyed them and got a lot of tips. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, you have said that it is very important to have a unique data set, and you know, to look for the right gap in the literature, and And but I wanted to ask you, as journal editors and as professors, maybe this is, I don't know if it's the correct question or it's too broad, but where do you see the international business subject in general, the subjects in international business going for the coming years? Where do you see a lot of potential? I don't know if it is a too broad question, but where do you see a lot of potential so that for papers and for research in general in international business in the coming years? Yeah.
I can go first if you don't want. I think we need to start to really listen to ourselves and doing more cross-disciplinary research. I think many of the areas, whether they are mergers or acquisitions or international entrepreneurship, you can see that some of the areas have been really researched quite a bit. And so if you're looking for for new avenues, I think go across to different disciplines, whether that is information systems, whether it's geography, for example. We see that now in the idea of location, global cities, for example. I've been working on something that's absolutely fascinating to find out what is being done in different disciplines, and then try maybe bring some of these new theories from there to your phenomenon. So I think the cross-disciplinary work, we keep talking about it, but I have really not seen it yet. But I wish, at least that's my wish. I don't know if it's necessarily going to go there, but I wish we would, as IB scholars, to start to look across to different theoretical and different disciplines. Yeah.
Daniel, any thoughts?
Okay, yeah, I can second this what Martina said, and that's why the Academy of International Business has that Journal of International Business Policy as one example of what Martina said, to bring the policy perspective into international business. And there are many other, in my field, I look at sociology research to look at social capital and how that informs international acquisitions. So if you have that cross-disciplinary perspective, I think that's one of a valuable avenue for future research. Another thing, and we talked about it earlier, is that more application-based research, that you look at what is really a relevant phenomenon in the real world, in multinational corporations. And, Jonathan Doe, I mentioned, who was the previous editor of the JWB, he talked about this a lot. And Denise Rousseau, you may remember Denise Rousseau, she was the president of the Academy of Management. She talked about that managers nowadays, they have to make evidence-based decisions. Rather than just making gut decisions or decisions without any data. And we need to find a way in academia to translate our research findings into a way that practitioners or policymakers can actually make those evidence-based decisions. And in order to do that, we need to conduct phenomenon-based research. So we need to look at a very good phenomenon. And now we talked about COVID, for example. How does that impact globalization? How does that impact companies operating or collaborating together? How does COVID impact international trade, for example? Okay, trade relationships. Last year during the pandemic, I know we were all isolated. I got certified by IBM in blockchain technology. Blockchain is, been around for quite a number of years, since 2008, the idea. And I have been teaching this for about 5-6 years now, but I used the opportunity to get certified in blockchain technology and artificial intelligence. Now, that has nothing to do with my field of international business and international mergers and acquisitions, but it, shows you those new technological developments now, and how does that affect, for example, international trade relationships? How does that affect international collaboration? For example, buying companies in a pandemic when you cannot even travel around the world, and you buy them unseen by just negotiating, okay? Another thing is, this is just off the top of my head, but I'm just reading a very interesting book by an author called Chris Voss. He was one of the most established FBI hostage negotiators. And the book is called Never Split the Difference. And he talks about negotiation tactics, okay? How to, negotiate with hostage takers. And you can apply this for business negotiation, right? After reading that book, I developed a nice assignment for my executive students, how to negotiate international acquisitions. And there's room for publications and say, how do those things, FBI hostage negotiation, how does that affect business negotiations across borders when you, negotiate in different cultures and different, languages and different, ethnic backgrounds, if you will, and still, come out in a win-win, kind of scenario. So from that perspective, it's more about thinking, outside the box, thinking across boundaries, and taking into account the current business environment we have right now. And this is changing rapidly right now, which I think is very exciting for us because there's always new things for us to study. Okay.
Thanks so much. Fernando Jaramillo is also saying in the chat, impactful research taps into important problems like poverty, diversity. Well, that there's this group RRBM, Responsible Research in Business Management. That's also interesting. You can go there. There are a lot of journals that are also supporting that initiative. So, I don't know, final thoughts, because we're getting into the end.
By us or by the audience, Sergio? You're asking us or the audience?
Yeah, yes. I'm asking anybody.
I'm not sure either. No, I would just say it was such a pleasure, and thank you so much for what you're doing. And we are, I am excited to come in person sometimes and then resume the, where we can actually all be in one room. There's just nothing like it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and the same for me. This was the first time I'm participating in this conference. Ricardo kindly invited me, so I look forward, to continuing being part of this conference. If there's a role or a contribution I can help with, and what my final word would be. Of course, it's been a pleasure and great meeting all of you. And I can only tell you, in Latin America, I told you my heart is there. Don't feel you're not as good as people in the US, okay? You should have all the confidence in the world. I know there's a language barrier because there's a lot of research in Spanish, and not everyone speaks English fluently, but work with people in the US who speak English fluently, and you collaborate as a team, and they can do the language thing, and you contribute your ideas. You should have all the confidence in the world. I think you are a very exciting region, Latin America. All the countries are very interesting and relevant. There's more and more business, not only in the region, but across the region. So I think, the future is very, very bright for Latin America. So I think you all should be very excited to live there and become the experts in your field. So, all the very best to you. And I look forward to seeing you next year, hopefully face to face.
Well said.
Thank you so much to both of you. Please remember, Journal of World Business, AIB Insights, International Journal of Emerging Markets are looking for your manuscripts. And also here, Fernando is saying the European Journal of Marketing is also taking articles and manuscripts with LA samples. So there are some journals there that are looking for our manuscripts. So don't hesitate to do so and submit your papers. Thank you so much for such an energetic and nice panel. I look forward to seeing you in person next year in Lisbon. And thank you so much for being in this conference. Thanks a lot. See you in the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so
much. Muchas gracias a todos.
Bye.
Chao. Cuídense. Chao, chao. Cuídense.